Hi class. The first section that we're going to talk about is our introduction into solving equations. So when we solve equations, the first thing we have to do is talk about a couple properties. The first property we're going to talk about is called the addition property of equality. And this property just states that when we're solving for equations, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we're going to get a little bit more detail of what that means, but we're just going to break down the key points of this property first. So when we're dealing with addition, something we need to understand is that what operation is the opposite of addition? The opposite of addition is subtraction. So that's something that we need to understand. That anytime we see addition, we know that we can undo that operation with subtraction. Another key part to talk about is what equality means. And equality is just another word for saying equal. And that's where we talk about whatever you do to one side of an equation, you have to do the other. It has to be equal. So like I said, this is going to make a lot more sense once we set up an equation and solve. But those are the key points you need to understand for right now. So if I start to set up an equation, we're going to start very simple. So for example, an equation, remember, has to have an equal sign with it. So I might, for example, have x plus 4 equals 10. And I understand that some of you can look at that and you know what the answer is. But we're just getting to the basics of how we solve equations. So I have my variable, which is my unknown value that I'm trying to solve for. I have my operation, I have another value, I have an equal sign, and I have our total or our final answer. So when we're solving for x, we want to separate the two sides of our equation into two separate parts. So now this is where our addition property of equality comes into play. So I want to get this x by itself. The only way to do that is to undo the operation that we have. In this situation, we have addition. So in order to undo addition, like we talked about up here, we have to do the opposite of it. And the opposite of addition is subtraction. So I have to subtract the value that is next to my variable that I want to get rid of. So 4 minus 4 becomes 0 or cancels out. And I'm left with just x. But like I said, equality means, or equal means, whatever I do to one side of my equation, I have to do to the other. So I'm going to subtract 4 on this side as well. So that gives me 6. So my final answer is x equals 6. And like I said, most of you can look and see 6 plus 4 equals 10, and you know that's the correct answer. But I want to show you one more part of this in order to make sure you completely do your problem correctly, and that's called the check. So I'm going to write over here the solution I got. X equals 6, and I'm going to check it into my original equation. So I'm going to erase and write it again, but this time showing my check. So x plus 4 equals 10. I stick with drawing my line to separate my two sides, but this time I'm going to plug in the solution I got. Anytime I plug in a solution, remember we put it in parentheses. So I get 6 plus 4 equals 10. 10 equals 10. And so I know that my solution of x equals 6 is correct. This, like I said, is a very basic example. We can use this with decimals, with fractions, with multiple things. But right now we're just going to talk about whole integers. I'm going to do one more example of this, and then we're going to talk about the opposite of the addition property and talk about the subtraction property. So we'll do one more example, and I'll show you what I mean when we talk about subtraction. So we'll do a decimal. 2.2 plus x equals 11.3. So even though we're dealing with decimals now, how we solve hasn't changed. So I'm going to draw my line to separate the two sides of my equation. I want to get x by itself. I want this to be the only thing on this side. So I have to undo what's happening here. And if I see it's adding, so I have to undo it by subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 2.2 from each side, because whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other. And this is a number that you might not know off the top of your head, and that's why we use calculators. So if you have your phone or if you have a calculator, don't be afraid to use it, just like we're in class. So 11.3 minus 2.2 gives me 9.1. 2.2 minus 2.2 equals 0, or cancels out, and I'm left with x equals 9.1. So again, we're going to check and make sure that we did our work correctly. So x equals 9.1, and then I erase my work and plug it in again. Two 0.2 plus x equals 11.3. Oh, that's a terrible 3. Try and write that again. So I draw my line, don't forget that step, 2.2 plus 9.1 equals 11.3. If I add those together, I get 11.3 equals 11.3, and those two equal each other, so I know that I did it correctly. So this is just the basics of how we do the addition property of equality to solve for equations. So I'm going to introduce one more property, and the only thing that's going to change, guys, in the next property we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about subtraction. So I'm just going to change one key word up here. And so instead of the addition property of equality, we're going to talk about the subtraction property. And it's the same exact idea. So instead of now looking for the opposite of addition, we're looking for the opposite of subtraction, which is addition. So when we set up an equation, instead of looking for addition, now we're looking for subtraction. So for example, start off easy. X minus 10, or x minus 11 equals 22. So now the only thing that's changed in our example is instead of having an addition symbol here, we now have a subtraction symbol. So we're still trying to get x by itself, but I have to do the opposite of what I was doing before. So I'm going to draw my line. And now to undo subtraction, I have to add. So I have to add 11 to each side. So whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other. So I cross this off because it becomes 0, and I'm left with x equals 33. So I put x equals 33 to the side. I erase my problem, and I'm going to do my check to make sure that all my work is done correctly. I didn't make any mistakes. So, x minus 11 equals 22. Draw my line, plug in my number, 33 minus 11 equals 22. 33 minus 11 is indeed 22. 22 equals 22. I know that I am correct. So, I think you guys understand, I hope you guys understand the properties of a subtraction property equality and addition property of equality. I do want to show you one thing if we make a mistake, if we mix these up, and show you why it wouldn't work. So,